So, you just got yourself a brand new grow tent and you need to set it up. Here are a few things you can do to make your job a little bit easier. We will be setting up this Apollo 4x4x7 grow tent. It's kind of big. This is not something that's going to fit into a closet or onto a small desk. Instead, we're going to be using this space in my workroom. Now, we do have to clear off a bunch of stuff at first because it's not quite ready. You do want to make sure that you've cleared off enough space, because once you get this set up, once you have all the tent material around the poles, it's going to be very difficult to move it around. So if you don't clean up at first, you're going to find yourself juggling. Something else that you might want to consider is getting yourself a little bit of floor protection, especially if you're going to be putting this onto a carpeted surface. I bought a roll of this from Home Depot. It's about $20. It was been treated with Scotch Guard, which will give me a nice way to protect the carpet from the inevitable spills, especially of fertilizers and acids, and even a little bit of soil. It's much easier to vacuum this up or replace it than to replace your really expensive and hopefully nice looking carpet. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get cracking. One of the other things that you need to consider is power. You're going to be drawing a lot of power for your tent, be it the lights, the fans, pumps, whatever accessories that you need for whatever you're growing. Now, you may have outlets that are going to be behind the tent. Once you get your tent set up and once you get plants in it or lights hung, you're not going to want to move it. So you need to plan ahead. Now, this is a standard outlet, so it's going to allow me to hook up multiple power strips to power the various pieces that I'm going to put into the tent. This is not going to do. This sticks out far too much for it to be useful. So instead, I could go down to the local hardware store and get a couple of those right angle plugs that are basically flat up against the socket. That's going to give me a much cleaner connection and the ability to connect multiple power strips from different circuits, not just from the same breaker, in order to spread out the load. Now, consider this before you start setting up, because again, once you have things in the tent, you're not going to want to move it. Power plugs are in and the carpet is down, but one of the things that people often miss during setup is the general cleaning. You see, the tent itself may be an enclosure, but it's going to be drawing air in from the outside. So the more dust that you can remove from the carpet or contaminants from the walls, that's less that can make it into the tent. This is especially important if those contaminants contain things like mold spores, which you want nowhere near your grow. Remember, we're doing an indoor grow because we want the advantages of an indoor growth. That includes year-round growth and the absence of pest and pestilence. So let's go ahead and put a little bit of time into making sure that that doesn't happen. This is the actual tent itself. So this is going to go over the top of the pipes that we're going to assemble into the shape of the tent. And down here we have all of our tent supports. Now, there are instructions that come with every single one of these kits, but because I'm a guy and I don't like asking for help, I'm just going to assume that I can figure it out. Let's do a quick tip. On your cross pieces, these are the pieces that are actually going to hold together the corners of the tent. You'll notice that, at least in the well-manufactured tents, there's always one side that has that little black bottom. That's the side that actually goes on the ground or up to the top. Now, it will work if you put them to the side, but, well, the geometry will be a tiny bit off and it just doesn't look as good. So if you want to avoid having to reassemble the poles after you assemble them, go ahead and put them in the correct orientation. Know that all of these tents are going to follow a certain pattern. You're going to have 8 poles that are typically of the same size. Those are going to be the ones that hold together the bottom and the top of the tent. Now, this is not long enough to get me that 7 feet of coverage that I need, the clearance. So they have this. This is a second type of pole that is designed to be put together. So when you put these two together, you'll actually get the long support, the vertical support pole. And then up top, you've got a third type of pole which has these little clasps on the end. Now, those clasps are so that you can create sort of a support lattice up on top and give yourself some hanging points for lights, fans, pretty much anything that you might need to put into your grow tent. I know you're excited, and the temptation will be to just assemble all of these pieces as quickly as possible, but don't do that. Now that we have our grow space and we have the starting of the interior structure, what we want to do is we want to unzip the tent material, and put it down in the proper space. Again, the reason why we want to do this is that the structure is going to go inside the tent. We don't really want to be dragging the tent around, and we don't have a whole lot of space in this workroom, so we're going to try to assemble in place. This can be a little confusing for first-timers, so just remember that you're going to unzip pretty much everything. This is going to open up like a flower, and then you're going to be able to put the structure inside, and then it sort of stretches over that skeleton, that steel skeleton, to give you your grow tent shape. Now, don't worry, you're not going to destroy this, you're not going to break it. It's designed to take a little bit of abuse. Just don't take any sharp objects to it, and you should be fine. So find yourself a zipper, and go ahead, start pulling. I'm sitting on what is the floor of my tent. You can see here the back and the sides. Now, the more advanced models are going to have various vents and zippers, so don't be fooled. Again, try to find the true bottom piece, the 4x4, the 2x4, whatever it is that you buy. One of the other things to consider here is that as I install the structure pieces, I want to be careful not to poke anything through. In fact, what I would do is you never want to push one of these pieces inside the tent. Rather, assemble that corner outside and then push the corner inside. That's just to reduce the likelihood that you might accidentally punch through the tent, which is definitely a no bueno. This is the assembly for the lower support. So once I put this into the tent, not only will it give me a little bit of rigid structure around the base, but I can start inserting the vertical poles, which will give the structure going up. This back vertical pole is the most difficult because all this material wants to sort of fall in. So be very careful when you're putting this in, because again, you don't want all that pressure to bend either the pole or the connector. Now, once you have your 4 vertical poles up and the ring up top, it means you're ready for the final assembly. Just go ahead and click everything in, and then take the tent material and push it over the top. And there you have it. So our tent is assembled. Now all we have to do is zip it up to seal up all the seams around the poles. One of the reasons why I chose this tent is because it has one of these on each side. This allows me to check on the status of my growth, status of my crops, without having to open the main door. When shopping around for your tent, you also want to make sure that they include plenty of these. These are vents, and this is actually double tapered. It's got an inside draw strap and an outside draw strap, which really allows me to cinch it down around 4, 6, or 8-inch pipes. This is, I actually kind of really like. This is a ventilation hole. This already has a mesh screen inside of it. So I can actually use this as my intake if I didn't have to put in an intake fan. This is also a really good way for you to check on your lighting. I like to leave a little bit of a corner untucked so that if I'm inside my room, I can immediately tell whether or not the lighting is on without having to open up the tent. So always look for vent holes, and always look for some sort of bug-proof mesh already built into the tent. It saves you from having to add it later in the build. One of the things that you'll probably hear about when you go shopping for a tent are light leaks. Now, light leaks are more than just a nuisance. They can actually really mess up your crops. Remember, a lot of the plants that we're growing are photosensitive. They know when it's time to bloom based on how much light they get. So if, for example, you've got a plant that's now flowering and it needs 12 hours of darkness, if in those 12 hours of darkness you've got a light leak, for example, direct sunlight hitting a small spot of the tent, allowing it through, you can mess up your flower cycle, and that's no bueno. The way that they avoid this is by using heavy-duty metal zippers. Don't go for the plastic zippers. They really don't work that well. And this kind of stitching that gives you a little bit of security, because as I zip these together, these two pieces of material will overlap, and even if the zipper is partially left ajar, it should keep light from leaking from the outside in, and vice versa. As I mentioned before, the inside of the tent has all this wonderful reflective mylar type material that makes sure that I don't waste light as it bounces off the ceiling and off the wall. Eventually it should make it to the plants, which is where I want my energy to go. Something else that the Apollo has included, and a lot of other manufacturers do this as well, is a spill mat. This actually folds up, and creates a little cradle for the bottom floor. You put it down here so that any spills of water, soil, etc. can be cleaned up after a grow cycle simply by folding this up, taking it outside, and giving it a good rinse. These are one of the hallmarks of well-built tents. There are a lot of imitations out there and a lot of really, well, horrible products that will fail after 1 or 2 grows. Apollo has the reputation as being a well-made tent that, well, includes all the little bells and whistles that growers really enjoy as we get further and further into our grow cycle. Now, the last little bit that we want to do for this particular segment is to install the roof supports. Remember, we're going to be hanging fans and lights from the top. Well, right now, the only way we have to do that is from the poles that make up the sides. That's not good. We want sort of a centrally loaded member that will allow me to hang the hooks and the ropes that I'm going to be using to hold up my fixtures. Installing the cross beams are actually pretty easy. If you'll notice, there's one of these that has a longer dip than the others. That's the beam that's going to go underneath the other 2. So that's what I'm going to put in first. Now, in this particular case, I've got 2 light fixtures I'm going to want to hang this way and this way. So I want my cross beams going this way and this way, which means I want my central member to be running straight across the middle. The way I'm going to do that is simply by hooking one end, giving it a little bit of a bend, and then hooking the other. Now, this will allow me to take these other 2 beams, put it over the top of the first one, and now their weight will be supported not just by the 2 beams on which they're resting at the ends, but also by this middle support beam. That's the end of the assembly of this tent. It's now a freestanding structure that will support weight for me to hang on my accessories. Now, in the next episode, we're actually going to outfit this tent. That means putting in the ventilation. It means putting in the lights. And it means putting all of that in before the plants. Believe it or not, it's so much easier for you to assemble the tent fully before you move in any of your green. Until next time, happy growing.